I'm putting back together the Rotax switch panel. I did have to replace one of the screws because it had all corroded away, and I ended up actually having to cut that one off. But luckily I've got replacement screws. They're not countersunk head, but I don't think it matters in this case. It should be fine. It's out of the way of the wiring. And I made a new gasket. This is just a piece of paper that goes on the back of this to isolate it from the case, and the case is being repainted and wiped down with anti-rust type stuff, and the switch has been all cleaned up and repainted as well. The front panel, I still haven't decided what I'm going to do, but I think I'll probably end up repainting this and make it look fairly new. That looks kind of crappy as it is, and I don't really like the ones where people just polish them up. I think I'd rather go back to black paint, white lettering. It'll have to be quite a thin coat of paint so that you can actually get the white lettering in there and be able to see it, because it's very fine. I wonder how they did that originally. Oh well, we'll see. It'll have to be a very, very thin coat of paint. But I was just about to put this back together because I can reassemble the switch. The faceplate goes on last. So this little gasket basically goes on there like that. This is going to be a two-handed job, but that goes in there like that, and those three studs also hold the switch in place. So I'm going to put that back together now. This is the little Rotax panel back together. I was able to reuse the original little plastic, I guess they're insulators for the little sockets. These aren't the same size as modern banana sockets, which are 4mm from memory. They seem to be smaller. I don't think I'll ever use them. The plastic on those is really brittle. That's part of one of them. There's just enough there that they sort of hold themselves in place. So as long as those are never used, because I don't think they would stand up to having something poked at them, they should be fine. The switch works fine. The switch is really big and chunky. These things are designed to have all the current go through them. So they're very, very big, clunky switches. The little knob just cleaned up fine. It just needed all of the corrosion rubbed off it, basically. And I did replate the screws, the two big screws. Just to put them through the nickel plating solution after I cleaned some of the grime off them. Fuse holder I'm missing. The starter button on these has got a really strong spring. Like, that's so strong I don't think I could push that without bending my instrument panel if it's only 1.6mm aluminium. But luckily you don't actually have to push it all the way down. It only has to go a little way. I think the switch contacts may still be a little dirty, so they should clean up a bit with use, I think. It's all been cleaned out with the electrical cleaner, and obviously I'm not going to be switching the main current to this. I just need to switch low current 12 volts to the starter solenoid, which will actually handle the main switching. So that should be fine. And like I say, I haven't done... Oh, my probe just came apart. I haven't done anything to the front panel except clean the grime off it. I haven't polished it or rubbed it down or anything like that. That's the state it was in it's impossible almost to read the lettering on it. So that's charge off on side and tail and all lamps. So like I say, I'd really like to repaint that, but this is brass, so that can be a bit tricky to get paint to stick to. But again, that might be fine. I'm not building like a ratty looking car, but I'm not building a perfect looking car, so it's somewhere in the middle. It just needs to look like an old car that's used. So if I paint it and the paint rubs off, that's probably fine. It's probably the look I want. But yeah, I imagine there's some old clockmaker's secret recipe or something that they use to blacken these. I'm not quite sure what that would have been. The other panel I've got over here, I haven't done anything really with this one yet except clean all the dust off it. That is just a big resistor on the back, which is broken. But again, the switch on this, they're big solid switches, and I thought, well, let's just hook it up to a power supply and see if it works. And it does. It's a really nice orange glow. Probably doesn't look very orangey on the film. I think with modern cars, you kind of forget how horrible and harsh, I guess, LEDs can be compared to a nice orange glowing incandescent bulb. So that switch again works fine. Because they're such big, solid, chunky contacts, they sort of keep themselves clean. They wipe themselves clean. So this would be nice to use because that is also branded Rotax. But turn this off. The problem is I'm not sure where I would put it. What I would do is I would use that as the main switch and probably switch a couple of relays, one for the magneto kill and one for the fuel pump, so you can run both of them off the same switch. But there's so little room in the car and on the instrument panel, unless you kind of need this cut out here so you can get your hand to the gear stick, but I could have it over here somewhere, make that cutout smaller. I'm not sure. Could lose the clock, have that there instead. Yeah, I don't know. I'll consider it. It's not urgent, but at some point I am going to have to figure out how to do the wiring on this thing. Somebody has sent me a copy of a wiring diagram for another one of these cars, which is super handy, using the same Rotax proper switch panel like this, so I can see how it's all wired up. So that'll be really useful. And that's all I've done on the car today. I've been distracted with other projects, and also I did a big cleanup. I've pulled out, this is my sheet of 1.2 mil aluminium, so I'm going to start looking at the petrol tank, and I've also kept aside the 2mm aluminium that'll be the under tray and the flooring, because I need to start doing that. And I have been looking at photos, going through all my photos of Brooklands, and it is another dead spider. The fuel line does run basically along the edge like that, not inside the chassis rail. That's where I was going wrong. So I do worry about that getting kicked, but I guess you just have to be careful. But that means I can run it can run down along there through underneath the pedal and then straight up to the fuel pump. I may have to just reduce the width of my seat a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch, just to get clearance around that. And then similarly on the other side will be the main battery cable running up to that starter solenoid, and there will also be other wires coming to the back. You don't actually need that many. You've only really got stop lights. There's no reversing lights, tail lights and stop lights. The number plate light is run off the tail lights. So really you could do it with 3 wires, or actually 2 wires, because you can use the chassis as the return. So there isn't a lot of cabling that needs to go to the back. If I want to put indicators on there, of course, then it gets a little bit more complicated. But the other thing I need to do is, of course, my radiator, but the weather hasn't been very good. I want to clear coat that, but it hasn't really been good painting weather. So, as I say, I had a big clean up because it was getting messy again. And yeah, now I'll try and figure out what to do with this panel. I'm suspecting people polish them because painting them is so hard. Normally if I was painting brass or something, I'd use a good etch primer. But I think by the time you put a coat of etch primer on this and then the paint, you're going to lose all of you'll fill in the engravings. So I wonder how they do restore these things. It's actually Christmas Day today, but we're not going anywhere. I need to go and cook a turkey at some point though. So I'm out playing with the car. The radiator shell, I do want to clear coat that still, but the weather isn't very good, so I'm waiting until it's a little bit less humid before I do that. But I've given it a rub down with some grey Scotch-Brite, and it's taken the really shiny shine off it. It's dulled it down quite nicely. I think that'll look all right. And with these Rotax panels, I was doing an experiment just painting a piece of brass with some black zinc paint, which is this stuff, and just baking it on. I want to see how hard it is, and it's not too bad. It's actually sticking fairly well. That's a nice thin coat. There's no primer there. It has got the right sort of gloss that I think these are supposed to have. It seems to be a nice decent finish. So I might have a go at painting these. You can see there is a little bit of the original, there we go, original paint there just flaked off. So I think it's probably well worth giving that a try. This is anti-corrosion type paint, and it's kind of car related, but I've been playing with this little sewing machine again, mainly because I got this is car related. I got sick of being covered in hot bits of metal when I was welding or grinding or machining things, so I just got a cheap leather apron. You can spend an awful lot of money on what's basically a bit of leather with straps. This was a cheap one, and it's fine. The only thing that was wrong with it is I really needed a medium size, and they only had large. So I got the large size one. The straps, the neck straps, were just too far out, and it meant that this front would stick out. So I unpicked those, and I've just moved them in a little bit, so it fits me a lot better. Works really well now. So I thought, well, that was a good test for the sewing machine I fixed up and restored, and it's worked well. Again, this is a walking foot machine. They don't call it a walking foot, but that's what it is. There's an extra lever there. And yeah, I just thought it's time to actually give it a try. I bought proper bobbins for it, metal bobbins, and actually had my first go at sewing with it. And it took me a while to get the tension right, as you can see. It turns out when I first started using it, I had to turn the tension all the way up to 9. So this is the little tension clutch here. Basically, it's a spring with 2 little metal discs. That's these here, and as you tighten that up, it just compresses the spring, so it changes the friction between the 2 discs, and your thread runs between those. So this has a dial from 0 to 9, and I found I had to have it on 9 to get it to sew nicely. That's how I sewed that. And I thought I'll take the top off because I'm sure that must be adjustable, and it turns out it is. This is on a little metal bracket, You can see there's a bolt there and there's a slot, and this had just moved all the way to the top of its travel, so it was on the minimum amount of tension. I just undid the bolt, pushed it down a bit. I sort of adjusted it. I don't know if sewing paper is a good test for these things, but that's what I had on hand, and I sort of adjusted it so the middle of the tension range works okay on paper. And I was just playing with the different stitches, seeing how that works. It all seems to work fine. On this dial, you've got your straight and zigzag stitches, and then through the selector, you've got these various strange pattern switches. Apparently, you can also mix these, so you can do two at once, and it'll give you a different pattern. It's all just cam driven. It's quite neat. So these are some of the patterns. And I think I have the tension right now. There doesn't seem to be any weird looping. The stitches seem nice and strong, so that works really well. I might go see if I've got some scraps of leather or vinyl and give it a try on that. I've got a leather needle in there. I just ran out of thread on my bobbin, that's why I've stopped. But I was able to do, this is just fabric, I think it was 8 or 16 layers of fabric. It looks like if I can get it under the foot, it'll sew it. It's a pretty good machine. The only thing I've noticed on it that's probably me just using it wrong is that spring seems fairly weak. So what I was noticing was I have to be careful when I was turning the fabric, or the leather in this case, that I didn't pull the needle sideways, and then as soon as you started sewing it would do a little jump. So that's just something to watch out for. Other than that, it's a good solid machine. Goes fairly well now. Oops, just got. I think maybe it should be able to go faster than that, but I'm not that good at sewing, so I don't need it to go like an MG42, for example. Nice and slow is fine for me. And yeah, the Chinese foot pedal works well, and you can get pretty nice control on it. So for a really cheap sewing machine, all I had to really do was fix the switch. That's not an original switch. They normally use push buttons. I just put a toggle in there. That works fine. Yeah, it works really well. I'm quite pleased with that. So like I say, I'm going to go and see if I've got any bits of vinyl or leather to see how well it does on that. But yeah, I think it was a good find. Did a bit more playing with the tension on this thing and just fiddling with the settings, trying to understand how it works, how you set it up. And it took me a little while to get it working on leather, but it turns out it's because the thread had come loose from up here, in which case it doesn't work at all. But that was just a little tiny scrap of leather. Goes through that no problem. This is just brown vinyl stuff. I just kept doubling it up, and it eventually went through, I think it was 8 layers, which is starting to get to the limit of what I can fit under the foot there. It's just a matter of finding out how far through you feed the material so that you know it's going to grab and start feeding it through. Little bits and pieces like that. So yeah, 8 layers of that, no trouble. This is just some white vinyl. And I just sort of folded the edges over and sewed those, and then folded it over again and did another row of stitches down there. I obviously have to practice a lot before I tried this on anything that's important. But I think it'll be worth doing some of the upholstery myself if I can give that a try. I'm not sure if I'll do leather because that would be a very expensive mistake. So I might practice with some cheaper fabric, I guess, some sort of material. But no, it seems to be working really well now. Working on the car again and trying to figure out the fuel piping. I was really hoping to get all of the fuel lines attached to the chassis, not to the body, so that it's easy to remove the body without upsetting any of the fuel system. But it turns out that's going to be a little bit tricky. So I've kind of come up with a compromise around where I can fit the fuel tap and run the fuel lines and that kind of thing. So I'm going to make use of the brackets that's underneath this. There was a little angle plate underneath there, so I could bolt through the timber. I'm not screwing into the timber for the guard stays. So I have decided to remake one of those little brackets, and I'm going to mount the fuel selector up here, basically. So it'll be out of the way of the bolt for this. The fuel lines will miss that, and I will run, one fuel line has to loop back because of the nature of the tap, but those two fuel lines will come back along here and across to the tank and go down into the tank here, probably over this side. Would you have it on one side or in the middle? But that's details to figure out. So those lines will come along here, and then they'll go down to where the fuel line comes out, which will be down near the chassis bottom there. So there'll be a line that goes down, and I will use joiners on those lines. So if you do need to remove the body, you undo it at the fuel tank and you undo it there. That has the advantage of, if I ever want to run the car without the body, I can't imagine why, I can make a temporary piece of joining pipe that just goes from down there to one of the pickups. I don't think that's ever going to be necessary, but we'll see. But this little bracket, it turned out to be a little bit fiddlier than I thought, just because of the way it works with the bolts. So the bolts come up from the bottom, so this little bracket will bolt underneath there, kind of goes through there, the bolts come up through it, and I was just originally going to bolt the tap in place with some 1/4 inch, just some little 1/4 inch screws. I will have to cut these down, but to get it to stand out of the way and to make it so that you could actually bolt this thing in place, because once that's up in the frame, it'd be really hard to get a spanner up inside there. It would make it hard to get a socket onto these bolts if I even want to get those undone. So what I ended up doing is machining up these two little bosses that I will weld to this bracket. They're drilled and tapped. I overshot one of my dimensions. I wanted those to be a press fit in there before I weld them. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to weld them. But one of them ended up a little bit oversized. But the new DRO setup works really well. I can actually machine things off these measurements rather than having to stop all the time and remeasure things. So when that's mounted and painted, then this will sort of bolt on there like that, and that takes care of the fuel system. And I'm just going to run the fuel lines exactly like in the originals. It'll just run along the edge of the chassis rail there, straight through the front, come up, and there'll be a loop to connect to that. Hopefully there is enough. I should be able to sort of bring it round. Either that, or I need to get hold of one of those 90 degrees for those, and they're not cheap. They're quite expensive, and again, I order it from overseas and it takes weeks to get here, that kind of thing. So we'll see what happens at that end anyway. And I think that'll work. And then similarly, I'm just going to run the main battery cable up along the inside there. It's, like I say, that's how they did it, so that's the way I'll do it. What else have I done? So I have painted the Rotax panels. That zinc rich rust proofing paint comes out quite well. It gives just the right sort of gloss to these, I think, and that paint's been baked on for an hour at a reasonably low temperature. I didn't want to risk melting the little plastic lamp thing there. I'm guessing it's plastic or glass. Looks like it's shrunk over time. There's actually a gap there, but that's okay. That bulb I showed the other day, I was only running it on 6 volts. It's a 12 volt bulb. That's why it looked more orangey than normal. And I cleaned up the little dash lamp, and that cleaned up really well. I kind of had to tap the base. I sort of had to carefully hammer that. I used my tiniest little hammer. It's actually a little weighted hammer. And straightened out the base on that. It's a shame it's missing the top. I don't know if I could make something or how that actually fits in there. And I also don't have a bulb suitable for it at the moment, but I'll see if I can find a bulb and at least see if it works, but I don't see why it wouldn't. And then the other thing I think I wanted to do today is cut out the steel to start making the petrol tank and see how that's going to go. But yeah, I think the fuel tap there is probably a good place for it because you can get to it from either the boot lid or from behind the seat. It's a little bit of a reach, but you can tip the seat forward and get to that tap. I've mentioned before, the reason I want 2 pickups is so that I can run a reserve, because there's no fuel gauge on these cars. Finished my little bracket, sort of welded on the back there. Need to paint it up, of course. I made a little tag to go on the front because this tap, it's actually a boat tap. This is meant to be a good quality one, sort of made in America. Hopefully it won't leak. I don't think it will. But the unfortunate thing is the positioning of the handle doesn't really match the inputs and the outputs. So this is the output, these are the 2 inputs. I'm going to set it up so that's on the main tank and that's on the reserve tank, and any of the other positions is off. So this will live down in there like that, so should be well away from everything. So I think I need to clean this up, and I'll paint up this little bracket. I'm not sure if I'll probably just paint the lettering on. I was thinking about stamping it, but the letters are so tiny I don't think you'd see it. So it'll be much easier if I put some sort of lettering over it. Just probably hand paint M&R for main and reserve, I guess. So that should work fine. It's Boxing Day. Should really be working on the car, and I have been doing a little bit this morning. But the weather's been really strange. It started off kind of wet, and then suddenly got sunny and got very humid, and it makes it very difficult to do anything. And I'm feeling lazy, so I'm sort of relaxing in my pub with a beer and my automobile magazine that I didn't get to finish on the train coming back from work. So I'm just sort of sitting and enjoying the nice weather. I've painted a few parts. I'm waiting for the paint to dry as well. So I think I'm just going to kind of take it easy for today and just sort of relax a bit. Yesterday I finished my little bracket, painted it and baked the paint on, and I made a little tag. And what I'm going to do is I'll laser cut some stencils out of masking tape and mask this off and paint in white just the lettering for main and reserve, so I know which way around it goes, because it'll be hard to remember. And I've been doing other small jobs as well. So I've been playing with 3D printing a fuse knob. It's a bit hard to see, but normally I print in PLA, but for this I printed it in ABS plastic, which is a bit trickier to print. It always warps, but small parts like this aren't too bad. And what I'm doing now is called acetone smoothing. So it's sitting in a jar. The tissue paper is soaked in acetone, and the acetone vapors effectively melt the surface of the 3D print to make it look smoother. That's the idea. I've never actually tried this, so it'll be interesting to see if it works. It's a bit hard to see what's happening. So hopefully what that will do is give me a nice smooth finish on that fuse holder. I could actually make a working fuse holder, and but I don't think I will. I think what I'll do is I'll just short this out and I'll have separate fuses. The other thing around the fuse holder is somebody emailed me and offered to send me a cast version of the real one, which would be quite cool. And then it occurred to me, I've actually got all the gear here to do casting myself, just to cast little tiny pieces. I've got some of the casting rubber type stuff you use. I don't have any resin that you then use to cast the part, but I could always use 2-part epoxy or something like that. So that might be something worth doing as well. But today, I had a bit of a slow day yesterday. I have to remember I'm actually on holiday on break, so I need to remember to take some time to actually relax. But I do want to get this fuel piping done today. So now that that's finished, I just need to do that lettering and I can mount the tap up here. I need to go through my brass collection of brass fittings and find out how many of those joiners I've got. I think I've got one, because I'm going to need one down the bottom somewhere, and I think the one's going into the tank. I should just be able to do, if I can get the right fittings, I want right angle fittings with the right sort of cone on them, so I can use compression fittings on them, because they'll need to come on and off occasionally. So they'll go on here probably with vibration loops, because they'll be attached to the body there, but the fuel tank is attached to the chassis. I don't think there'll be much flexing there, but those loops are a good idea. Out of my lab, so 3D printers going in the background, but I'm just playing with these little Rotax panels, and I was trying to figure out how to do the white lettering in the engraving, because it's very neat but very shallow, and I didn't fancy my chances of getting paint in there, so I'm actually using this, which is a grease pencil. So I got these to write on glass or metal or things like that, but I found they didn't actually work very well for that. But what I'm finding is it's working really well for the lettering on this. So I can rub the pencil over the engraving. Let me try it on this one. And sort of, you can see at first nothing happens. But if you keep rubbing this into the lettering, eventually it builds up in the little depression for the letters, and you can build it up so it's effectively flush. You just kind of keep scrubbing it over like this, and eventually you build up a nice deep coating of this wax, and I think that should work pretty well. And then to clean it off, I just use a little bit of naphthalene lighter fluid on a cloth, because it doesn't affect the paint, and you can just wipe off the excess. So I'll finish these up and we'll see what they look like. So this is how these panels came out with the wax pencil. It works really well, and it's effectively flush with the surface. There's a little bit of grime on these. I need to wipe them down. I think I'm probably going to give them a coat of clear coat. And when it comes to the switch, it's over here. I took it apart, I got the rust off it, painted it, and I'm not going to put it back together as it was originally, because some of those parts are broken. This, which goes on the back to that resistor, was actually riveted on. I had to file out the little rivet, but I don't need all that stuff, so I'm not sure I'm going to be using this or not. But it would be very handy, because I do need an ignition light, and I could use the switch for the fuel pump and the magneto kill. What I would do is wire those into a relay. The problem with that is the relay for the fuel pump is easy enough. This switch is switching to ground, so it switches to the chassis, and it just switches these two contacts to ground. The problem is the fuel pump relay, that's no problem. You can switch that to ground to turn it on. But the ignition is the opposite. You actually want to short it out. You short this out, which kills the spark. So what you would need to do is use the normally closed contacts on the relay so that when the power's on, those contacts are open so the engine will run, which is fine. The problem with that is technically you can run this engine without a battery. You don't need any low voltage system at all because you could hand crank it and it would run on the magneto. But you're always going to need power for the fuel pump anyway. The only thing I thought about with that is if you lose 12 volt power, you'll also kill the engine. But like I say, it'll stop anyway because the fuel pump won't be running. So I think that's what I'll do. I'll use this to switch a couple of modern relays all hidden away. They'll be hidden up on a panel up inside there. You won't see those. So that this on-off switch controls the fuel pump and the magneto cutoff. So you'll get nice on-off action there. Be nice to use it. So yeah, but those panels have come out really well. I think I'm going to give them a coat of clear coat just to make them a bit more scratch resistant. I have clear coated the radiator shell up there. The reason it's hanging up there is because I'm using this. It's 2K in a can, but it's not the sort of 2K where you mix the parts in the can and then you have to use it and it goes off. This stuff is proper 2K, but it is air curing. I guess it's actually the moisture in the air, and it won't go off in the can, so it'll stay in these. The only problem is it is fuel resistant when it's properly dry, but it takes 14 days for it to get fully chemical hardened. So that's why it's hanging up there out of the way. I think for those panels, I'm just going to use this clear coat, which is a bit easier. And I don't need these to be petrol proof. If there's ever petrol on these, I'm in trouble. Just finishing up for the day. I did get the Rotax panels done. I ended up having to redo this one again. So I think it took me 3 attempts in the end. And that was because when I went to clear coat them, I was at the bottom of the can, and this one came out fine. When I did this one, it kind of spluttered all over it and ruined it. So stripped all the paint off, re-etch primed it, repainted it, and then redid the lettering. Excuse me, I've been working on another project which involved sawing up some plywood, so there's sawdust everywhere. Luckily I've got a small drink here. It's just cider. It's quite hard to get decent cider in New Zealand, I find. So all the normal bottle store or supermarket type cider is way too sweet. Luckily there's actually a locally produced cider which is proper English style, very dry, almost like vinegar cider, which I quite like, but it's about $11 a bottle. So I saved that one as a treat. Anyway, on this one, on the third attempt, I realised you don't need the lighter fluid to help remove the wax. If you just rub it with a clean microfiber cloth, it removes most of the wax off the surface and just leaves it in the depressions. So yeah, I think those should work quite well. I haven't got much else done on the car. I went out today. I did buy it a Christmas present. I bought a drip tray to go under it instead of an old cardboard box. And I keep getting distracted on other projects because effectively I'm on holiday. So the motivation's not there to do the car, even though I've got all the time to do it. I have mounted my fuel tap. So that's there. And up there, should be nice and dry now, is the little tag for main and reserve. Again, that was painted and then laser cut some stencils, did the white paint, clear coated over it. That clear coat that I used up on my radiator shell, like I say, it takes 14 days to fully cure, so it's fully chemical resistant. And normally these spray cans, it says to shake them for about a minute. This stuff you have to shake for about 3 minutes. And I thought, I don't have time to shake a can for 3 minutes. So I've kind of spent a lot of time the last couple of days trying to build a machine to shake the can for me. And it's not going well, to be honest. It's such a violent motion. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make something that'll hold itself together, especially out of wood. But what I have is the gearbox and motor out of an old cordless drill. I've been 3D printing sort of holders for it, which for the top one, you can see it's quite a complex shape. This has a taper on it. This was my first prototype part, which doesn't have a taper, but it has got the cutouts there. And the idea will be that the motor and gearbox will go like that, and there'll be a strap to hold it all down. It's just a simple crank sort of mechanism, and I didn't do anything fancy. It's just steel pins. I figure it's not going to get a lot of use. There is a bearing in here though, a skateboard bearing, but for the connecting rod it's just a piece of steel bar with some holes drilled through it. Effectively all the connecting rod is something to hold two holes at the right place, I guess. So it fits over the pins, and this kind of works. I've only kind of played with it by hand, but it's going to need to be pretty solid and bolted down, and the balance is going to be a problem. That's why I've got this over here acting as kind of counterweight. I was just playing around just to see how much weight I actually need to get this balanced, which would get it statically balanced, but of course it's not going to be dynamically balanced. So I suspect the whole thing will shake itself to bits. It doesn't actually have to rotate that fast to shake the can. You can do it fairly slowly as long as the little ball agitates it. So yeah, that's been a bit of a distraction. It's been ages since I've used my 3D printer, so it was quite fun designing the little parts, printing them out. I'm still printing some parts now. So another silly little project. And I'm building an owl nesting box, but I'll talk about that in a different film. So really, I need to sort out the fuel piping on the car. Still not making huge amounts of progress at the moment. There's just a bit of planning and stuff going on, but I do have the fuel tap mounted, so that's mounted up in there with the little label. The pipe outlets and things are all in the right place. Still need to figure out the actual piping, but I've been thinking about the fuel tank and how I'm going to do that. And I've been going through my collection of brass fittings, a whole box full of them, all sorts of bits and pieces. And of course you never have exactly the pieces you need, so I've had to order about $150 more worth of stuff. But I've got a few bits and pieces. I have a nice, a little bit mangled, but brass cap here. Rotherham's off Coventry. So I think I'll use that as the drain in the bottom of the fuel tank. I'll solder the brass fitting in place. And I've tried to get the right fittings so that I've got the compression fitting on here and the right angle on there. What I'm actually going to do is, I realized I need to make the top of the tank flat. So I've modified, it started raining, modified my shape here to give me a flat, and I'm going to make a steel ring that's tapped, has a hole in the middle and a ring of tapped holes, so that I can fit a plate to the top of it with the fuel pickups in it. And the fuel pickups will be some kind of 90-degree bend like this, with a pipe soldered into it, and this will go into the top of the tank and screw down. And then there's a compression fitting for the pickup tubes. So there'll be two pickup tubes coming off this, coming to here, one for the reserve and one for the main. So now I have to wait for all those brass fittings to arrive, and I will probably start making the fuel tank and run the fuel lines, hopefully in the next day or so. And this is my Rotax panel. It's already covered in dust because I've been doing some woodworking stuff, but that's how that came out. I may need to 3D print the little plastic inserts around the terminals, but it's come out quite nicely. The dust just gives it a bit of character. I mean, wipe it clean, put a few scratches on it, it'll be fine. And this is the Rotax switch panel. I did think for the Rotax, what I could actually do is, everything's covered in dust. Somewhere here, next my random parts, I do have a 2-position switch, and this is an original Lucas switch. The terminals on these let you wire them up in some really interesting ways. So I could actually use this as the fuel pump and the ignition enable switch, and I suspect this could fit in there quite nicely. What I could do is make a new bracket for it, basically like this, and mount that switch in there if I wanted to. So I've got various options there, but it is slowly coming together. Because it's my holiday period, I'm kind of getting distracted on all sorts of other things, like the Ruru nesting box there. But it is meant to be a holiday, so I am kind of taking a break from things, I guess. It's another day of my holiday. I think it's Saturday, so I have another week left. But you've kind of joined me in procrastination central, I think. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing on the car. Need to run that fuel line. I've ordered brass fittings for the fuel tank, but I could start making some of the parts for that. But I've been distracted with other things. I have given up on my paint shaking machine for now, but I have been playing with the 3D printer, doing some parts for my cloud chamber, actually, because that's been sitting around for ages. I'm trying to get a few of the things that have been sitting around forever done and out of the way. And one of the things is I've gone through all my random boxes of nuts and bolts and washers and things and sorted them out, started sorting them out. So at least I've now got screws, washers, nuts and bolts. I also found a tin with some old, and I think some of these are really old taps, so I clean them up as well. I'll put them in with my tap collection. These are various random containers, all these little bits and pieces were in. That is a box of things that are potentially useful that aren't nuts and bolts and washers and screws. That's just rubbish. So I'm slowly tidying up. I also got distracted building a Ruru nesting box, an owl nesting box. Head gardener saw a PDF showing how to build one, sit there, and she was quite keen, so I've done that as well. I can put in a little picture of what that looks like, I guess. I'll probably talk about that in a garden update though in more detail. So here's more random bits and pieces, hinges and brackets and cup hooks and springs and all sorts of things. It could do with another sort through, but I'm going to leave that for another day. So yeah, petrol tank next. I think maybe I can start cutting out the blanks and see if I can actually start forming the outside of the tank and the ends of the tank, plus a baffle in the middle. I think I'll only need one baffle right in the center. Should be enough. And run the fuel piping. The other reason I'm not getting much done is because of this 3D print, which, and not that guy, he's not distracting at the moment, but I will watch that soon. This was, I think that was about 6 or 7 hours, and then it failed. I've actually redesigned that part. The reason it failed is because this particular filament came on a cardboard reel, and the filament got stuck, and the reel, the printer has enough power that it pulled the filament off and it broke the reel, and then it all jammed up. Normally the filament comes on these plastic reels, which are much better. So the problem with that is, anybody who's worked with cable will know when you take cable off a coil, off a drum, you have to unwind it. You can't pull it off the top. If you pull it off the top, like I'm doing now, it has a twist in it. And the problem is that twist is eventually going to get so bad, it'll tangle itself up. You can see as it pulled it then, it tightened. So this is about a 7-hour print, and what I have to do is every half an hour I have to come in and take this and untwist the filament, being very careful not to break or kink it, because then it'll jam up as well. Otherwise what will happen is it'll keep tightening as it pulls it up, and it'll get stuck. So I have a timer set. Every half hour I come in and check it and unwind it. This piece is going to be the base for the cloud chamber. I realized that I probably don't need the foam insulation. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm pretty sure it'll work with this, because there's so much airspace in it, because it's not printed very densely. That should work as a good insulating layer, and it'll keep the cool in there. I can probably, I had to make the hole a little bit bigger, but it almost fits well enough that I could test it out with this and see if it actually works and will still chill down. The other thing I've changed on this is I've made it so that the rim of the glass bell sits into the print, so that'll stop any drafts or anything which will upset the little tracks. Yeah, this is really annoying, and it looks like it's time for another untangle. So we'll see how that ends up. I don't really feel like I've done much in the last week, and I kind of haven't, not on the car, just little bits and pieces. But as I say, I'm halfway through my holiday and I've been doing various other things. I started getting back into the car today, and then got distracted because Shed by the Tracks did a live stream chat thing, so I went and joined in with that. So it's all Randall's fault. I haven't actually achieved anything. But this is where we did get to. I made a right angle fitting for the SU pump, and what I'm going to do is run the fuel line from here. I'll put a vibration loop in it, and it can run along the chassis rail. It runs just inside the edge here. I thought it actually ran on the inside. It doesn't. It runs kind of along this edge, and that then clears the cross member here. It can go down, go through a hole in here. There's already a bit of a gap, and then up the firewall. I'm going to put the joiner sort of in here, because then I can have another piece that is attached to the body from the fuel tap that joins onto that. You can see I have the front part of the body removed, and this kind of shows how the instrument panel stays in place, as well as the sort of firewall bulkhead there. So the only problem with that is you do have to remove the choke cable, because that goes through the frame, through a metal bracket to give it a bit of support. So you do have to remove the choke cable, but that's pretty easy. Before I fit the fuel lines, so I have taken the front half of the body off. As I was removing it, I suddenly realized, well, without the back half there, there's nothing holding the doors in place. So next time I do that, I'm going to tie the two doors together so that they don't fly apart. And I have marked out my 2mm aluminium sheet that I'm going to make the under tray from. So I've measured that up, marked that out. The under tray will basically go, you can see I've taken out that middle cross member for now, but the under tray goes from the rear cross member here all the way up to this front cross member. So it'll need a little bit of shape in the front there. It'll just need to curve up to follow the chassis rail. It gets bolted down along there, along the sides, at the back there, and of course to the cross member that goes across. So that should be nice and strong. I'll probably do a separate piece for the tail that'll go from there all the way back, and then there will be another piece which tries to fill in as much of the gap from the front there up under the engine. It gets a little bit tricky because you need openings for the brake cables, for the steering. By the time you've put all those holes in there, there isn't actually much there, but it'll help, and it'll make the bottom of the car nice and smooth. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I do need to get a new step drill. This is the tachometer cable, and I did leave a little hole for that to go through there. I need a rubber grommet on it, but that hole isn't big enough because the ends of the cable are pretty big. So I need to open that up. I've got grommets for it. So there'll be a rubber grommet in there for the tachometer drive. I've got rubber stripping that'll go along this edge, and that'll help seal between the gearbox and the firewall, but still allow for a little bit of movement. And I'll run the main battery cable up along that side, and the rest of the wiring that goes back to the tail, which is for the stop lights, the marker lights and the number plate light. I only really need 3 wires. Will either run down that side or down this side. They'll just be sort of tied to whatever other cable is running along there. And I think that's it for where we're up to.